Greetings out there in podcast land, and welcome to Nuance, the show that brings you a nuanced exploration of Israel, the Jewish world, and beyond. I'm Benny Shoulder.
I'm Dan Pfefferman. We are super excited to bring you another great episode of Nuanced.
Before we get going, I'd like to give a shout out to our audience watching us today on Facebook Live. Thanks for tuning in. For all of you listening on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and all the other podcast platforms this week, know that there's a live video version of the podcast, which you can check out weekly, available here on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Nuance Podcast. So check it out when we record or watch all our episodes on our YouTube channel, Nuance Podcast, as well as our website, nuance.com.
Also, make sure you are following us on Instagram, where we are at Nuanced, and Twitter, we're at Nuance Podcast, for all the latest updates and episode drops and teasers. And as always, make sure to subscribe to Nuanced on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we would love it if you left us a 5-star review. There are rumors out there on the dark web that it makes some kind of difference for our ratings, so we would appreciate that.
You're on the dark web?
No, I've heard of this thing called the dark web.
Listen, anybody that's checking this out later in the video, or if you're watching online
There's
right
no
now,
dark web.
no, there's definitely a dark web. Julius is just not on it yet. Right now, you might notice that Dan and I are again in remote locations from one another. This is not a typical thing, unlike last week and the weeks before that, when I was in the States or Dan was in the States, and we weren't together at the same time. Dan, you now find yourself in Israel, and I'm in Israel too, but you are isolated at home. Wah, wah, wah.
I am isolated at home. So I went on a speaking, meeting, greeting tour with my new job at Shiraka, and which is how I met our guest today, Anat. Hi, Anat, how are you?
Hi, all good.
We're going to introduce you properly in a second. But I met Anat as part of the speaking tour. She is, of course, the Israel's Consul General to the American Southeast, and she hosted our delegation for 2 of those wonderful days. And then, of course, Israel decided to once again arbitrarily enact new restrictions and say that even if you're vaccinated, you have to put yourself into quarantine when you get back. And so that's what we had to do.
Yeah, I sense some editorializing in your voice there about Israel's new COVID restrictions. Could it be that your time out of Israel for the first time in a year and a half impacted your view of what's going on?
Well, unlike you, it was actually not my first time out of Israel. I went to Dubai and Abu Dhabi twice, where I saw that they were, it seemed like they were handling the COVID issue in a lot more sensible way than we are here. I saw a very different approach in America, which seemed to be more of kind of ignore what's going on, put your head in the sand and just live life anyway. So I've seen now 2 approaches to COVID, but yes, I think it's kind of ridiculous that you got back a week before me. You're not in quarantine, but I am. Anyway, that's why we're not together. And we had some adventures on the flight back, actually. I've never had such adventures where, oh my God, I don't even want to get into all of it, but they rerouted my flight twice.
The travel gods are not kind to you.
Yeah, they were not. Who is the Greek god of travel? Is there such a Greek god?
No.
Or a Roman god?
No god.
There should be. I'm going to look that up actually in a second, but that's it. So I went on this delegation. It was really energizing. It was incredible. I met a lot of fascinating people. I was, I think, reintroduced to a world that I had been involved in different ways and in different aspects. And that's, like I said, that's how I met our guest today, Anat. So like I said, before we introduced her, I was so impressed with you, Anat, on this trip. And we had such a fun time together that I said, we have to have you on the show. And you found a window in your schedule to be able to join us. And we're glad you did.
I'm glad to be here.
You're speaking to us from Atlanta still?
Indeed. Yeah.
Indeed. And that's where you've been living for the last few years.
Yes, arrived here a little over 2 years ago. So it's it's been an interesting 2 years for everyone in Atlanta as well. It's not the typical posting when you have COVID to factor in.
Yeah, right. Zoom diplomacy, I guess that's, we've had Zoom school, Zoom meetings, Zoom work, and I guess you've had to do Zoom diplomacy. We're going to learn all about that in a second. Benny, you want to kick us off into our announcements?
So sure, check it out, guys. Like always, Nuance is a listener-supported podcast. We rely on the generous support of listeners such as yourselves to make sure that we keep this party going. So if you want to send out your support to us and make sure that we keep bringing you quality content, quality podcasts, quality guests, and general good banter and good times, you can definitely make sure that you join one of the many listeners in over, Dan, how many countries are we at now?
Penny, we're up to listeners in 132 countries.
Wow, 132 countries. That is, I would say that like we should just start saying the countries that we don't have listeners in at this stage.
It's true. And you know what? I'm hard pressed to think of who they are, except for China, which I think we're just generally blocked from.
I think we're blocked. We have to be
China.
blocked.
I mean, we have listeners in Iran, Afghanistan. I hope for our listeners in Afghanistan, we really hope you're doing okay and you're being safe. I actually talked to one of them over the last week, and he's trying to keep his spirits high, but he's also trying to get the hell out of there. It is not encouraging to see that news.
Not good.
It is not good, but back to our show, we do have listeners all over the world, including there, and it's been incredible. We didn't talk about this because when we hit our 1-year anniversary of making the show, you were abroad and then I was abroad, and so we haven't really had a chance to properly sit and reflect on what it means to have been doing Nuanced for a year.
No.
But kind of one of the fun moments is when you're traveling and you're talking to people and they say, "Oh, you're Nuanced. You're the Nuanced guy."
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
It's very cool. It's very cool to think that something we started. We had a purpose, and the higher intellectual purpose of what it is we're trying to do, but it's also something to do during COVID that we want to keep going, and to see that it's
since COVID keeps going forever.
Since COVID keeps going. But it's stuck, and I think we've grown with it, and the show's grown, and I'm very happy with that. And we'll do once we're back in the studio together for the next episode, we will properly reflect on all of these things.
Good. So that you can make that happen, listeners, please generously donate. You can make an ongoing contribution via our Patreon account, Nuanced at Patreon, or donate if you want to make a one-time donation, you can donate to our PayPal account. All the information on how you can do that is on our website. Again, www.nuanced.com.
Lastly, last announcement, if you want to host a Nuanced Live, of which we've done a few recently, and we have a whole series of those going, you can do that. Reach out to us, and we will gladly host an event, podcast. We will moderate a panel or a session for you, or be the speakers ourselves. Whether right now virtual or hopefully once again soon in person for you or your community or your Jewish organization. So for all of that information, and if you want to see Benny and I doing this kind of thing for your organization, then check it out on our website, www.nuanced.com.
Terrific.
Yeah. So let's get to our episode. We have with us Anat Sultan-Dadon. I always like the hyphenated names. Who is, as I mentioned, the Consul General of Israel in Atlanta and to the American Southeast. She has been with the Foreign Ministry since 2004. Her first posting was in Cameroon. She's also had positions in Germany, at The Hague in the Netherlands, and most recently in Canberra, Australia. Benny, be careful. She has an MA in criminology, so she can see right through you in all of your foilish shtick. And we will be talking to her today about Israeli diplomacy in the United States, about what it means to be a consul general, about the state of diplomacy in kind of the era of social media and political polarization and all of these wonderful things. And we'll also mention, Anat, you kind of buried this. Well, I guess it's not part of your bio, but growing up, you kind of also had a diplomatic experience as the child of also a senior Israeli diplomat. So first of all, welcome to Nuanced. We're glad to have you with us.
And maybe before
be here.
Before we begin, my wife also has a degree in criminology. Does that mean that she can see through me?
Absolutely.
All right, never mind.
Your wife's a teacher. Why does she have a degree in criminology?
I have no idea. That's what people did back when they didn't know what they wanted to do. They went to Bar Ilan and they got a degree in criminology.
So let's start at the beginning, Anat. What's it like growing up as the child of a diplomat?
Well, I loved it, and I think most families that I've spoken with have kids that I either loved it or hated it. I loved it. So I was born in the Netherlands, and then growing up, we were in Israel, but also in Kenya, Egypt, and Italy. So it was, it was I would say a good preparation to the curiosity and the interest that I have in other countries and other peoples, languages, etc. So I loved it.
Amazing. What was the most interesting place to grow up? And the next question is, what was the most challenging? So those are two different questions. What was the most interesting place to grow up? And then what was the most challenging place to grow up?
I'm trying not to be a diplomat here, but really, they were all interesting. Kenya, you know, I was fascinated with safari and everything. I was a kid. That I think is difficult to beat. But Egypt was a very interesting experience. It was, on the one hand, arriving there as diplomats. On the other hand, my father going back to what was his home, to where he was born. So that was a very special experience. And I would say that's probably also where the challenge was as a child, because we were there. My father was there on his first posting. He later returned as ambassador, but he was there on his first posting. It was in the early 80s. And we were not popular everywhere. So in school, even though it was an American school, the American school in Cairo, which was a phenomenal school, I had to deal with a lot of questions about what and why Israel is doing what it is doing. I think normally, you know, kids from other countries, they don't really need to be into politics or what exactly the political situation in their country is, but I remember that from a very young age.
Wow. Does your father speak Egyptian Arabic? Was it, you know, from a cultural perspective? So Absolutely. Was it, did you pick it up too? Did you pick up the Egyptian dialect?
Very sadly, no. The 2 years that I lived in Egypt, the American school then provided French as a second language. And yeah, unfortunately, I do not speak Arabic. I can understand a little bit, but that is something that I deeply regret.
What, you know, this was, I'm assuming, in the pre-social media days. So were people, you know, the kind of questions you receive were probably completely influenced by mainstream media or by just stereotypes, or what? You know, what was the kind of the questions you were getting? How would that differ from the kind of questions, you know, that, let's say you were doing this today in places like Egypt or even in the US, you know, how would that differ? The kind of curiosity, the kind of opinions people have about Israel, how would that differ?
I don't know that it necessarily differs. I think it's you know, it can change maybe how things are presented, but in essence, I don't really think there's a major difference there. I remember, for example, one class specifically, and I don't remember what the context was or why the teacher decided to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the establishment of the State of Israel. And walking out of the class, my classmates asked me, so really? So you Israelis just kicked the Arabs out of their homes and just decided that it was your homes? So I think that, in many ways, that question can reappear even today. It's just I think as a child, I was in 4th, 5th grade there. It's a sobering way to get acquainted with what representing Israel means, even if you're not officially a representative.
Yeah, I can only imagine. How did you decide to join the foreign ministry? How did you decide to become a diplomat yourself?
Well, it was actually it's something that I was always sort of interested in the back of my mind, but I was absolutely certain that this is not the career that I would pursue, because I knew what it was about, and I knew that it's a career that has significant implications, not just for the person who holds the career, but for the family, because it is a career that involves the entire family. And so I was certain that this is not the career that I would pursue. And then my husband came across the ad for the cadet course in the newspaper and told me, Anat, this is really you need to apply. And after trying to convince him why it's a terrible idea and explaining all the disadvantages, he was not convinced, and I did apply. And that's how I started my own journey in the Foreign Service.
If you don't mind, exactly.
We get together.
What was it together?
What were you doing before? If you don't mind us asking.
Yeah, no, not a problem at all. So I studied, as mentioned, I studied a criminology for my master's. I did psychology and education for my bachelor's degree. And I sort of tried out different fields. So I worked with some injured veterans and rehabilitation. I worked for a certain period at the Israeli Ministry of Defense. I worked at a Channel 2 News at the foreign desk. Just did a little bit of finding out what is out there until I arrived at this profession.
It really is kind of cool when you think about it. Like, a lot of us go through life not knowing exactly what we want to do, and sometimes we kind of ease our way into whatever it is that we find ourselves in and say, you know what, okay, I guess I'm in my, whatever it is, 30s, early, late 20s, mid 30s, whatever it might be, and say, I work in this industry, I guess I'll just do this now, and I might as well, or I'm pretty good at it, or whatnot. And then other people have kind of these aha moments where they're literally going through a newspaper and it's like, oh, yeah. And in your case, it wasn't like, your husband asked you to, you should do this, and then you started down the path. But, I think I've talked about this in other episodes, Dan, where it's like the place that fate sometimes plays in our life, where you, if you wouldn't have opened the newspaper that day, or if they had not posted the ad in the paper that you would, had read, right. Yeah. You would not find yourself sitting in the room that you're sitting in Atlanta, Georgia right now. And it's like one event, plays into the other.
It's true, but I think it's a lot to do also with just being open to opportunities, to discovering new things, to trying new things. I think that when I left, I think it was just a few months, the Channel 2 News, and certainly when I left, when I decided to leave the Ministry of Defense, people were like, "Are you stupid? I mean, who leaves those kinds of places? You can grow, you can develop, but I think it's also about knowing for yourself what's not a fit."
Yeah, right. And I think we're kind of in an age today. I mean, I'm personally going through this still. I literally just started a new job and a new career path that I didn't imagine I would be doing it a year ago. And we just kind of live in this place and time where people don't go to a place of work anymore for an extended period of time. Maybe, you know, now that you're a diplomat, that's different because there's a long trajectory. But no, kind of what you've done, Benny. You know, you went into the tourism world, and even there, you've jumped around from company to company a little bit. But
a little bit, but now the world has other plans for tourism. So it's
yeah,
like,
right. No, yeah,
we might have to be forced to do something else.
and you might have to be forced to do something else. And you know, you launched a podcast, which you never saw yourself doing. So it's like you have to be really flexible. And I think what you said on that is right. Is you have to trust yourself. If you have a social or family safety net, all the better. And we kind of live in this time of age where you just can't count on anything. And if you see opportunities, you know, you got to jump, and you sometimes got to say, okay, let's see where this goes. You know, let's try a new adventure. Let's try a new path. And, you know, I think that's just kind of the age we live in these days. You know, it's funny you mentioned that. When I made Aliyah in 2005, I had imagined myself joining the foreign ministry or something similar. And in my first position in the military, I worked very closely with the foreign ministry. And everyone, including from the foreign ministry and all my friends, oh, this is perfect for you. You have to go. And what you said is exactly kind of, you know, where I had in my head is, you know, and my wife at the time, and still to this day, was like, no, I came to Israel to be in Israel. I didn't come to Israel to live around the world, you know. And so I kind of gave up on that option and said, okay, this is not for us. You know, I'll find other things to do. But it's something that most people don't think about, is that when you go on that career path that you did, you're taking your whole family with you to live a very, you know, unusual lifestyle for the next 20 years or whatever it is. And it's interesting that it's your husband who pushed you to do that. What does he do, or how did he adapt professionally to all of this?
You're totally reading my mind again.
Maybe that's why you do a show together. So I was fortunate to choose wisely when I married him 23 years ago now, in that he has a character that is very adaptive, and he finds ways to get things done and work it out no matter where he is. And he's done different things along the way. So I can't say that I feel like I've cheated him out of his life, because in many ways, you know, this is ours. It's a joint venture.
He was down for the journey.
Absolutely. And I think that's, you know, it's an essential component, no matter what you're doing, really, but especially if this is the career and the lifestyle. And the girls as well. I think, you know, there are many challenges, having to change location every few years, say goodbye to your friends, fit in again. But you know, advantages and disadvantages, like everything.
Can I ask you, because I have these conversations with my wife, because we're, you know, in the process of perhaps moving, and it's kind of one of these things where it's, you know, regular normal people, I don't think, do that or give credence to the ability to do that. And if they do, it's like, well, we have to find this perfect time where the kids are at this certain age where they're, you know, not susceptible to having this super letdown of having to have their whole world be shattered and this and that. How do you explain it to your kids when you're going from place to place, and how did they experience, you know, that separation and reconnection or new connection to the next place?
Well, I think it's a lot less about explaining, because this is how they were born. This is how they grew up. This is what they know. But I think it has to do a lot with how we feel about things, right? If we're enthusiastic about the next step, about where we're going to, what we're going to discover, that rubs off on children. Yes, there are challenges, but I think overall, you know, maybe further down the line, we'll hear the complaints about how we've ruined their lives. But so far, I think they're doing fine.
Good. And
how old are they now, by the way? Your kids?
So we have a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 11-year-old.
Okay. So this is the time to enjoy kind of middle school and high school life in the United States, I guess, right?
Yeah, ish. With Zoom, I think it's a different teenage world. But yeah, that's true. That's true whether you're in the US or elsewhere.
Right. Well, it's definitely allowed us to maintain relationships with people that otherwise we wouldn't be able to maintain, and depth of relationships that are kind of, not obvious to think about in our times. Beyond that, I'm just curious about a lot of things. That your lifestyle is very interesting to me, and it's very curious to me, the whole living and moving to different places. How does it work? Do they suggest to you a number of different places where you might be interested in taking a post, or does somebody come to you and say, we need you to go to Cameroon?
Or do you suggest where you want to go?
Right.
You're like, hey, like how does that work?
So as a cadet, the first posting, you are told basically where you're going to go. We were given a list, and I think we had to choose from the list like our top 3 priorities, and that ensured that we would not get any of those. And then yeah, I was basically told, you're going to Yaoundé, and Yaron and I.
You were like, where?
Yaoundé, Cameroon. Yaron and I actually had to open the map and look at it and start reading about it, because all we knew was that they played soccer, and I'm glad we did. It's not a place that I would have ended up going in no other scenario, really. And it was a fascinating posting for us. But really, after the cadet, you have the cadet course, and then there's a period. It used to be 3 years, now it's 5 years. But when you're no longer in the cadets, a cadet in the ministry, then every year you will see the opening positions for the coming summer, and you can decide whether and what you want to apply for. And then it's up to a nomination committee and the various applicants for any given position to then choose who is going to be nominated for any specific position. And so I did choose to go, but it's always a question. It's always a question also of when you want to go on posting and what is available at that time. And sometimes, yes, it's part of a conversation with the ministry. And sometimes they are looking for someone to fill a certain position, and they will ask, "Are you interested?" So there's that as well.
Based on what? Based on language skills? Based on just personal connections? How does that work?
It can be about language. It can be about a field that you've dealt with. It varies really, and it's a relatively small foreign service, and so yeah, we do know each other, and it's not always, but it's often also a two-way street. But I did choose to be here. And I feel really fortunate that I was able to receive this posting.
Anat, before we get into the posting, for our American listeners, just so they can understand, when you say that Israel's foreign service is a small foreign service, could you compare it to the foreign service of, let's say, the United States or a larger country, so that people can get a grasp of what we're talking about?
I cannot. Because there is no comparison.
No, but just in terms of numbers, how many diplomatic missions?
So I don't know what exactly the numbers are. I can tell you, when it comes to the Israeli Foreign Service, we speak in hundreds. For the American Foreign Service, the State Department, it's certainly not in the hundreds. So yes, a big difference, and not just with the United States. With many foreign services, I've seen colleagues from other countries where, for example, they specialized in a region, a Francophone, for example, or a Latin America, etc. We have less of that in our foreign service because we are much smaller. And so I feel that in many ways we are able to also develop more diverse careers within our foreign service.
Okay. I noticed that, and I noticed on your bio it said you served in the intelligence sector of the military. I did too for a time period, and I noticed when I would meet my American counterparts, for example, they will have spent 20 years doing country X or region X. And I don't know if it's something, just in the way we do things in Israel, we tend to move people around a lot. So you'll get much more generalists here. And I think at least working with the Americans, I noticed they like to have specialists. I don't know if that cuts across other parts of how they do things versus how we do things. But what you just said kind of reminded me of that. And maybe that's something you can do when you have, such first of all, you have to take care of the whole world, but you also have thousands of people versus hundreds of people, like you were saying, for something like this. What was Cameroon like? What does an Israeli diplomat do in a place like Cameroon, and what is life like there? Just how's that experience work?
Well, it's a fascinating experience. Our embassy in Yaoundé, Cameroon is similar to our other embassies in Africa, is sort of a regional embassy because from Cameroon, we also cover several other countries in the region. So that included also at the time Gabon, Central African Republic, Congo Brazzaville, and Equatorial Guinea. It was a fascinating experience, and I think where I first encountered people who remember what Israel did for them when they were first trying to get a hold on their independence, on their infrastructure in so many different fields, medical, agriculture, education, and many there remember what Israel had done for them when Israel itself was a very, very young country.
Yeah.
And I think that is it's a beautiful thing to see. But of course, today there is so much that we do and can do in Africa. And I think that there is much more of an awareness of the importance of our relations with the countries in this continent and all that can be done. Yeah.
Dan wants me to try to think about like connection points sometimes to different areas of content, and I'm trying to think in terms of the mission of Israel in Africa. You mentioned that some of the people in Cameroon are, they might recognize what Israel has done for them. I think that that's a part of a story that a lot of people don't necessarily understand, and maybe you can help us. What is Israel's role in Africa these days, or has it been?
Well, there was when I'm referring to what Israel has done, that is to do with Israel's foreign aid agency under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mashav, and that is still going on today, alongside relations in many other different levels and fields. So, of course, economic relations, political, etc. But through Mashav, Israel's aid agency, still today, we carry out a lot of projects and activities in order to share Israeli know-how, experience, technology, to empower in fields where Israel has something to share. And in many ways, that is very relevant for Africa. I know that when we were there, we were heavily focused on different medical programming, again, agriculture, but also developing small businesses, women empowerment. And I think we need to remember, yes, it's different aid programs, but we benefit from them as well, because that's part of the conversation and the two-way street that we have with countries, with peoples. And
it's a form of soft power, basically. I mean, right? It's diplomacy through international aid, through extending soft power, and it's something. I mean, it seems to me, kind of from the side, that as a small country, we certainly try to do that a lot, and it's something I think that we could do even more of. Certainly to developing parts of the world, whether it's that or agriculture in kind of drier parts of the world. So that's really cool.
Right. So there's a reference to that, in that we're known in many places as a startup nation, but what we're discussing has to do with us being also an impact nation, and how we can harness what we have learned, our know-how, our technology, to help address global challenges and other countries who sometimes share challenges that we do.
Do you find that the private sector, which is where a lot of this innovation comes from here, is readily willing to jump in and help in these kind of cooperations and collaborations when the foreign ministry or other government agencies ask them to jump in? Or is it do you have to convince them? Well, what's the dynamic there like when you want to go, I don't know, if it's startups and you want to get a startup involved in helping in some African country, what does that look like?
Well, usually, at least from my experience, what we did was not directly with specific companies in terms of Mashav, but yes, sometimes cooperations are mutually beneficial. If you have an Israeli technology to do with water management or with water purification, whatever the case may be, yes, they can contribute, but also obviously it's a part of what they establish themselves for. So it serves both a dual purpose.
Benny and I were talking, in the prep for this episode, and it dawned on us, we'd love to get a breakdown of how the Israeli diplomatic structure works in the U.S., of course, as much as you're allowed to share. But, there are, of course, the ambassador to Washington, as you would have an ambassador to every country, but then there are regional consul generals, of which you are one of. And if you wouldn't mind giving us a breakdown of how that works. And it seems to be, again, from kind of our outsider but connected to this world perspective, that works a little differently than a lot of how other countries operate in the U.S. So I don't know if you'd mind giving us an introduction to that.
Sure. So we have an embassy in Washington, which is where an embassy is placed at the Capitol. And then we have in the U.S., we have 8 consulates general that each cover a different region of the United States. In our case, being situated in Atlanta, we cover 7 states in the Southeast. But we have consulates in Miami, Boston, New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, Houston. And each consulate covers its area and promotes the bilateral relations on a state level in the states that we cover. On every level, be it political, economic, cultural, academic, and each consulate being situated where it is has different emphasis and an adaptation of its goals according to where it sits and what the priorities are there.
Sorry for asking, but is that unique in terms of, are other countries using that model and sort of deploying out across the geography of the United States, or is Israel kind of, does Israel have more consulates than others?
It would depend on the country and its interest with the United States. And there are many different factors. It's economic interest, but also, how many of its citizens live in the United States and where are they concentrated. In Atlanta, for example, there are about 25 different consulates based in Atlanta. You will find more of those obviously based in New York, and it varies. Some countries will have a similar number of consulates. Some will have even more, depending really on their interests and who they are. You can't compare Mexico and its consulates and interest in the United States to maybe a European country or an Asian country. It really depends.
Okay.
What kind of, how much of your work is, you said you work on the state level. I'm assuming you also work with, mayors of different cities. So kind of the political level, how much of it is promoting economic ties? How much of it is also, and this is kind of where I think Israel is in a unique capacity, in a unique situation, that you also have to do public diplomacy because of Israel itself being a very divisive political issue. So how much of your time is devoted to this kind of breakdown?
Right. And public diplomacy is not just about us being divisive. I think it's also about people being perhaps even less familiar with what Israel is about. I'm saying perhaps even less familiar because it's not just about Israel, right? I think the younger generation today is not really aware of what is going on in the world that is not directly to do with them. And so it's not just about being political issues or others that are making headlines. It's also about sharing what Israel is about. And Israel is about so much more than the average person is exposed to through traditional media or social media. I would say that we try to dedicate and allocate our time and resources to our political work, economic work, public diplomacy, but in the end, everything is also intertwined, right? Because one has to do with the other. If we're promoting economic work, that is of interest to the political level as well.
Sure.
Public diplomacy, if I have an issue, we currently have an issue now at a university in our region with a very problematic course and lecturer that is very anti-Semitic. That is something that it relates to the academic sphere. It relates to the Jewish world, but it relates also to the political world because it's something that I'm raising with a political level as well. So everything is sort of intertwined, and I think that that's also, in a way, the beauty of diplomacy, that your different work and contacts can complement one another in your work.
And if I may, because I think what you brought up about the university issue is actually a good segue into something else, but I also want to use it kind of as a case to try to understand how things might work. So you're the Consul General to Atlanta, to the Southeast, based in Atlanta, and there are universities throughout the United States. I think something like 40,000 universities. In your region, there might be, I don't know,
4,000.
Yeah, sure, 4,000 something. Various universities have issues. We're living in difficult times. How does it happen to fall upon your desk to know that there is an issue at a university, and how does it then become the diplomatic work of official Israel to deal with a professor on a campus? It's an interesting, it's interesting, and it really is interesting.
Right. So it's often not something that falls on our desk. It's about being in a constant situation with our eyes wide open to what is going on around us, and identifying where do we want to, or where do we need to intervene. And when it comes to anti-Semitism, for example, that is always something that I see importance in. So through the regular contacts that we have in the region, right, with different organizations, with communities, we will hear about things that are going on, and I think
somebody calls you, they
yeah,
the students reach out and say, I'm having a problem.
Or they'll CC me on an email about something that is starting to emerge, about something that is evolving. This case started about 2 weeks ago, and so we were looped in. But it's on us to begin with, to make ourselves relevant, because if we haven't proven to be relevant, then people are not going to loop us in. So that as well, it's a two-way street, and once we're looped in, I need to see from our perspective, from my perspective, what can we do as a consulate, right? We're not a Jewish organization,
right?
We're not a part of the academic world. What can we do?
So in that kind of a case, and you don't have to talk about the details of that particular case, but in a case like that, what tools or what actions might a consulate take? Well,
we have conversations. Diplomacy is a lot about talking in general. Right. But we have conversations when we have an issue, any issue on a campus at a university. Then I will try to begin with approaching the administration in order to have a conversation and understand what their thoughts are, what they are doing, what they intend to do, convey the importance that we see in addressing the issue, and suggest perhaps how it may be addressed. And then we speak with other involved parties on the ground, be it a Jewish community or others. What I am trying to do on the issue of anti-Semitism is also involve non-Jewish parties, because I feel that there is too much being put on the shoulders of the Jewish communities and the Jewish organizations when it comes to combating anti-Semitism, when it should be a broader responsibility. And so
how are other communities taking to that?
I can give you an example. One of the things that we would like to promote on a state level is the adoption of the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. That's the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, which provides a very, very good framework and understanding of what really falls under anti-Semitism, what constitutes anti-Semitism. And that is a very, very important basis for discussion, because often people will think, oh, well, I don't know, is this anti-Semitic, is it not? So we would really like to see the definition adopted on a state level. Obviously, the United States is a member country of IRA, the State Department, the Department of Education, have adopted the working definition, but we would like to see that on a state level as well. It's an important message, but also it provides a very good framework for having the right kind of conversation.
If I recall,
yeah.
When that was introduced, a lot of kind of more progressive Jewish groups in the States had an issue with it, because it seemed to take criticism of Israel that they are okay with, and that certainly I think even on an official level, Israel doesn't discourage discussion about Israel or criticism about Israel, and it makes it seem that it's anti-Semitic. So, I remember that discussion. How do you draw the line, on the one hand, you're representing a country, right? And of course, you want to do that to the best of your ability, but there are real issues involving Israel. There are certainly divisive issues. There's political issues. There's discrepancies, even among the Jewish diaspora in the U.S. And many who call themselves Zionist and call themselves Israel supporters have a lot of issues. So how do you do your work, and kind of also, given that, but specifically regarding this I forget the acronym that you mentioned, IR.
IRA. It's
IRA.
IHRA.
IHRA,
International
correct.
Holocaust Remembrance Alliance.
So how does that work with that conversation that was being had? I think it was last year, whether criticism of Israel is considered anti-Semitism, yes or no, and then how does that make your job even more challenging than it already is?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, exactly as you mentioned, Dan, we don't lack criticism in Israel. I think it is one of the things that we actually can take great pride in, right? The not only the freedom of expression, but the fact that there can be very, very significant criticism on both sides. With whatever it is that Israel is doing. Anti-Semitism and the reference to Israel under that, it's not about a criticism of Israel's policy like you can criticize any other nation. It's about singling Israel out. It's about treating Israel differently. It's about treating the nation state of the Jewish people differently than you would any other country and its policy on this or that. And yes, there has been a criticism by some of this working definition, but I think that the working definition, it's important to say, first of all, it's not a working definition that Israel came up with, right? It's an international organization, and the definition was agreed upon by the member countries, but it provides also illustrations, examples, in order to really clarify what is about anti-Semitism and what is not. Yes, criticism, absolutely legitimate. We engage in it all the time as Israelis. But not legitimate when it is biased, when it is about singling Israel out, different than any other country. Do
you find people are receptive to that? Do you find, when you approach the critics who you say, hey, listen, what you're doing is anti-Semitic, do you find people are willing to listen to that, or do they fall into the some of my best friends argument, or even the I'm Jewish, I can't possibly be anti-Semitic? What is that? How does that conversation? You can, but yeah, what does that conversation look like?
Yeah, I think too often there's an apprehension of making reference to anti-Semitism, about using the word anti-Semitism, even by some in the Jewish community. But I think that's exactly the issue. It needs to be a legitimate part of the conversation. It can't be a part of every conversation, because obviously it's not always about anti-Semitism. But yes, if I'm speaking with a university administration about swastikas that were drawn on campus, and
that's just artistic expression, Anat.
And their statement of condemnation, they did condemn, but they referred to hate, then I say that's not good enough. This is not just hate. This is anti-Semitism, and it needs to be called out. And that is true for any anti-Semitic incident. It needs to be called out for what it is, because that's the first step in really addressing things properly. It's not just about hate in general. It is something very, very specific. Yeah. And I think that is on us, but also on others. So when I'm trying to promote the adoption of the IRA working definition on a state level, I approached my colleagues here in Atlanta, other consuls general of countries who themselves adopted the IRA working definition, and I asked them to make this ask together, because it shouldn't be just the Jewish community or Israel that is promoting this. And indeed, that is how we made the approach to the different states in our region on behalf of 7 consulates, not just the Israeli consulate.
I find it very interesting, the concept of having a working definition of a problem like anti-Semitism. And I'll tell you why, what I mean. We as Jews, we can sometimes say amongst ourselves, and our Jewish listeners may or may not agree with this, but we know when we're talking with an anti-Semite. We know there's an innate sense, I think, that many of us have when we're talking to somebody who does not like us as Jews. There's something where you can somehow just feel it, and I think that if you're looking at other communities, other marginalized communities, other minority communities that suffer from discrimination or that suffer from racism, if I take, for example, African Americans, there is no working definition of racism against the Black community. They don't need they don't have a written, an agreed upon definition of what anti-Black racism is. There's anti-Black racism. Why do we, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some sort of an agreed upon document or something, but I don't know if any other community has to put in writing how they define hate against their community and then bring that to an accord status with other countries and other communities to say, let's all agree these are standards of what this means, and then let's work against it. And I think that there is something unique about that. I don't know, I haven't thought about it, what that means about the problem itself, that it has to be defined and agreed upon, that others maybe find it less of an issue or less of something that is, or maybe it's more gray that we need to outline what the nuances are. But it is interesting nonetheless for me to reflect on the fact that I do not know of any other marginalized or minority community around the world that has a document that outlines what hate against them looks like. And I don't know. I think, what do you guys think about that?
Well, let me throw kind of answer it and then spin it into a question here. It seems we have a discrepancy within our own community, Benny. Certainly within the American Jewish community about what is anti-Semitic and what is not, and this might get to
clearly,
and this might get to the reason why we joke, we like to say put 2 Jews on a deserted island and they'll build 3 synagogues so that they can, they both have something to boycott or, whatever,
right,
whatever that is. We can't agree often on a lot of these things. And you have many Jews still today who don't think there is a justification for an ethno-nationalist state. And what they'll say is they don't think there's a justification for any ethno-national state.
Right.
And certainly if it has to, commit human rights abuses, et cetera, in order to remain a state. And that's where their criticism comes from. They say we're not being anti-Semitic, we're, living up to our values. I personally don't agree with that, but that's where they're coming from. And, it's a tricky place to try to put this into a debate and say what is anti-Semitic, what is not. You also have, it gets even more complicated because,
But is that then coming from a place where the Jews shouldn't have self-determination, or no people around the world should have self-determination? Because if the discussion is specifically about the Jewish state,
right,
then I think that's exactly the issue, right? Because usually it's not a discussion about peoples in general and people's rights to self-determination in general. The discussion is usually very, very specific. It's about the Jewish people's right to self-determination.
Or if it's somebody that says, well, I don't just single out Israel. I would say no ethnic national group has the right to self-determination. I would say to that person, do you speak out against the Italian state? Do you speak out about the French state or the Chinese state? I mean, these are all ethno-national states. I don't hear.
So that's where
speaking about those countries.
That's where the criticism doesn't hold up to that. That's where the practice doesn't hold up to the theory, because you will hear those people say, I'm against all ethno-national states, but they're only protesting against one. And sure, we're one of the few that's in an ongoing conflict, which I want to use to get to another point later on. But something that came up in the recent Pew study on American Jewry, I thought this was interesting and relevant to this, is that Jews who vote Republican and Jews who vote Democrat, which is about 70-30 in the U.S. context, just so people are aware, 70% vote Democrat, 30% vote Republican, perceived the level of anti-Semitism in the U.S. at about the same rate. What was interesting is that those who voted Republican did not perceive the same levels of discrimination against other minorities as did Jews who vote Democrat, which leads me to understand this, that some certain kinds of Jews, and it's those who are more on the conservative side politically, perceive anti-Semitism to be distinctly against Jews, where others see it in a wider societal context of xenophobia and racism. And I thought that's interesting to see that reflected in the numbers. We were talking about partnerships earlier, and something that struck me that I don't know if other people are doing it is you had an interesting staff member on your team on that to do outreach. I'd be glad if you could talk about that a little bit and how you're working in that whole team concept that you put together.
Right. So I mentioned that our different consulates in the U.S. are located in different areas, and each has its own emphasis based on where it sits. And for an Atlanta-based consulate, I think that one of the most important priorities is our work and outreach with the African American community. And because Atlanta is in many ways the beating heart of the African American community in the United States. And there is, of course, a significance to that community beyond Atlanta, but also beyond its size in terms of public discourse, political discourse, etc. And so arriving into Atlanta and knowing that this is a field that I want to strengthen our relations in, I knew that it's not something that we could do only as outsiders. And so very early on, I recruited a team member, Wendell, from the African American community, from a leading HBCU college, historically Black colleges and universities. In this case, it was a Morehouse College in Atlanta. That has proven to be very, very important and beneficial in allowing us to connect, well, to begin with, first of all, understanding, because there's a lot to learn, and then understanding how we can connect and what we can actually do together with this very important community. And that is something that we've worked to build and strengthen over the last 2 years.
I thought that was phenomenal, and it took me a second. Again, my own biases. It took me a second to understand that he worked for you, and that he didn't work for, because we met him for the first time at the Center for Civil and Human Rights, which is related to the African American rights movement, civil rights movement. And he was, he met us there and he gave us a tour. And so it took me a second to, again, disassociate from my own just assumption that, oh, he works for the consulate. He doesn't work for the Center for Human Rights, but he works as this bridge. So you instituted that position that didn't exist before.
Right. So, well, it's not that frankly, it's not that I created a new position at the consulate. I had an opening. It was an opening for a PR position, and I worked hard to convince him that he was the right person for that position. And through that, really, our work evolved. But yes, I think it has to do about intentionality in what we are doing. It's not about coming across and then something and yes or no working out. And it's also not about the face of diversity. It's about being intentional and real in what are my goals, how do we best achieve them. And so after arriving in Atlanta, a few days into my arrival, one of the first meetings that I held in Atlanta was going to meet with a Morehouse College president, David Thomas. And I went to meet with him because I wanted to also convey the message that this is an important priority for the consulate and for the consulate's work. And since then, I'm glad that we have managed to really build this relationship. But that is where I first met Wendell, and I think that is true really for any audience and community that you want to connect with. To have the conversation from the inside is very, very different than having it from the outside. It's different also when we are approaching, when we want to do an event, when we want to have a meeting. It opens doors in a very, very different way.
Yeah, and I noticed, and it's phenomenal. And I noticed, again, from my brief interaction, he didn't seem like he was a tokenized member of the team. Like you said, it felt incredibly authentic. That he was speaking from the perspective, from the perspective of a very important community in America, a long marginalized community of America. And so I think it's phenomenal that you decided to bring him onto your team and to try to build this bridge. Over the past couple of years, especially, we've seen, how can I describe this, Benny? Kind of a resurgence or maybe a spike of tensions, certainly racial tensions in America, between the African American and the broader community. The George Floyd murder and the kind of the Black Lives Movement.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people in the Jewish community in America were kind of taken aback because the Jewish community, at least in America, has memories of being an integral part of the civil rights movement.
Right.
And in the Jewish community, and you could have seen this from the Jewish press, it seems like, did people forget that we marched alongside,
Right.
Martin Luther King Jr.? What happened?
I'll say it like this. I was in Minneapolis or this is an example of that, I guess. I was in Minneapolis, where I'm from, Anat, in July, and I went to, there's an area where the murder of George Floyd took place has become a shrine, basically, where people have left messages. There's all kinds of protest, art and sculpture and all kinds of just interpretive information that's all over the place. But I have, and I lived in that city for 18 years. I've never seen more Free Palestine graffiti in any other location ever, outside of here in the land of Israel. Visiting like the security barrier or something. Like, it's all over the place. It's been written all over the thing. I saw there was a picture of Martin Luther King, and it said on it, "Free Palestine," with the Palestinian flag. And I'm looking at it, and I'm just thinking, if I'm an alien and I'm dropped in here, okay, and I don't know anything about anything, and I'm looking at the context of what I'm looking at here, and then George Floyd and racial issues in the United States, what does Palestine have to do with this? What is the connection here between this and that? And I think that's it's not an innate connection that one can easily understand. But when you're in it and you are I'll say a normative, younger, adult American progressive person, there is a very deep connection where one can, in their narrative or in their understanding of events, tie a connection between white supremacism, colonialism, imperialism, the Jewish state, Jews, Black issues in the United States, slavery. Like, it's almost like there's a different reality and there's a different narrative. And I kind of take my hat off to you and people like Wendell and others, that it's like you're fighting this fight, which, it's a battle of ideas. It's not a battle of, you're trying to win a narrative. And I don't know, in this, to reach that generation is very challenging. I don't understand how it's done.
I agree. There's a very significant challenge there, but I'm not sure that it's really about a battle of ideas. The battle is really trying to uncover what is a false parallel, because it is an agenda-driven parallel, supposed parallel, that is being made by those attempting to bash Israel.
Right.
And I think it's often just about having the conversation, the broader conversation, the context, and the conversation is not about Israel is wonderful and everything that you've been told is not true. Yes, there is a conflict going on in Israel, absolutely, but it really does have nothing at all to do with the racial issues of the United States.
Right.
And I think that yes, there is a shared history of Jews standing together with African Americans in the civil rights movement, but that too has eroded over time. And I think that both communities need to do better in reconnecting, because it is a mutual interest. Just like the Jews can't and won't be able to combat anti-Semitism on their own, it is true also for racism. It is true really for any group that is the target of hate and discrimination. What we do is try to educate not only about the shared history and its importance, but the relevance today, the relevance and the importance today of standing one for another, and educating about Israel, about what Israel is about, because it is a very, very different story than the United States. The United States has its issues. Israel has its own issues, just like any other country. But it is not about a parallel between the issues and the racial issues specifically here in the United States and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In this
I think that in the context of that, and maybe this is something that I'll say, and I don't expect you to say it, but it's almost like there's a willful ignorance on the part of many people to try to dig deeper and understand nuanced facts, and to get an education that's proper and based on reality and truth. And I think that there are nefarious actors that sometimes take advantage of that dynamic within a certain generation, or within any generation in this social media, mobile time that we live in. And I don't think that I think that people's eyes are not as opened as they could be as to, how are these narrative contexts being woven? Who's designing them? Who's out there promoting a narrative of Israel as a white supremacist colonialist state? I would hear that and I would say, wait, why, how? I think that there's a lot of people who kind of just say, yeah, okay, cool. That's what the zeitgeist is. And I guess I'll go there.
That's exactly what's happening though. I had a discussion literally a few days ago with a woman who is a Jewish educator with a master's degree in, Jewish and Israel studies. And this is literally what she does professionally. And she was coming at me with all of these accusations and claims saying, she's ready to give up on Israel because of the reality and because of the Gaza war. And I was like, I don't understand. I couldn't even start to unpack where she's coming from. And this is someone who's supposed to be a lot more educated, who's lived in Israel, who speaks, decent Hebrew. I couldn't understand where this was coming from. By the way, that whole kind of message and the trying to connect the Black story in America to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is something that groups are doing purposefully.
Right.
And they are sneaking in there. And what you're saying, Benny, it's true. A lot of people today, they're not trained to peek behind the curtain and see who's crafting these messages. And so today's, whether you're talking about ideological actors, or whether you're talking about nefarious state actors. We know Russia, we know China, Iran, Turkey are all, kind of trying to sow all this kind of disinformation just to weaken Western society. These are things that we know from intelligence agencies and things like that. But this was interesting. And one of the side conversations I had with Wendell Anat on when we were going around, and actually I had the pleasure of meeting other young African Americans who are doing different collaborations with the Jewish community, and either they work for Jewish organizations, or they work for to promote African American society, but they are in these kind of collaborative places. And I was trying to get an understanding of, if you live in Israel, or if you live in kind of the more insular parts of the American Jewish community, you would get an assumption that African Americans have become anti-Semitic, whether passively or actively, in the last couple of years. And there were some incidents of well-known African Americans who said some things on the air, or who retweeted anti-Semitic things, or who retweeted, follow Louis Farrakhan. And it might have been Wendell, but he explained to me that maybe a third of the African American community is anti-Semitic and kind of has been caught up in these beliefs and this thinking. And so there is an important need to reach out to them. Maybe a third is actually very pro-Israel, and maybe comes from the more evangelical communities. And then maybe a third is just kind of, they don't really care. It's not what they think about. They certainly have plenty of their own problems, and they don't need to be thinking about Israel. And I found that interesting because, if you're looking at this, again, from an Israeli lens, if you were watching, and Benny, this goes to your point, we have to constantly read the news. We have to look at our Facebook feeds, understanding the biases of everything it is we're reading, whether people are doing it intentionally or not. So and this is something that you constantly have to be aware of and unpack. If your Facebook feed is 70% Israeli Jews or 80% American Jews, you're gonna see one view of reality that is only true, through a very specific.
Correct. And you and I and Anat are able, and the three of us are able to entertain that conversation about how Facebook works, because we understand how social media dynamics function, and we understand that.
Sure.
We talk about the concepts of echo bubbles, and we talk echo chambers, and we talk about the concepts of, algorithmic breakdown of information, and we constantly talk about how there are no more gatekeepers to information in the media, and it's the democratization of information leads to sort of information funnels and whatnot. I don't know if the average person thinks about that. I think they open their Facebook feed and they think to themselves, oh, I haven't heard from these friends in a while. I wonder why that is. And then they'll, repost these. You see them from time to time. It's kind of like, repost this, and it's Facebook. Facebook's going to institute this new thing, and if you repost this, it's like, all right, you don't get it. But I think that's the way it is, and I don't know how. It seems and it feels sometimes, and I'm sure that this is something that Anat, you felt in many cases doing diplomacy, that there are times and there are issues where it feels like you're trying to empty out the ocean using a coffee mug or something like that. The ocean's coming in the window, and you got to sort of take it out, and this is all you got. And I think that the social media dynamic is a place like that. I don't know how you effectively, without government regulation and oversight, negate the effects that nefarious influencers might have on one's world and social media. And the more people engage with that and receive their information only from that, the more place that a nefarious regime like the one in Tehran or the one in North Korea or in China or wherever might have to affect public discourse, Russia, of course, to affect public discourse. And I think that it's unfortunate that spread to the sphere of anti-Semitism. And I obviously applaud the efforts that people that have on the ground in the United States, such as yourself, are able to do with communities, because I think that you can't really there is no substitute for face-to-face encounter and engagement.
How do you deal with that today, Anat? This whole challenge.
Well, I think that alongside the fact that absolutely we need to be present on social media, and I think that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is well aware of that, and we have, of course, on different platforms, we have channels and engagements in different languages, including Arabic, Persian, etc. And our different missions are active on social media. Yes, I think that alongside the fact that we need to be present there, it is not just about social media, and we need to remember that. And I think, yes, it does matter when you have the conversations outside of social media, when you're targeting people who can then spread the message, when you are reaching beyond your natural networks, which is why it is important. It is important to reach and have conversations, in our case, within the Jewish community, because even within the Jewish community, many are not familiar with necessarily with the history or the facts or the context, but it's very, very important to reach out beyond our natural networks into other communities, and specifically into communities that are constantly being fed lies and distortions of the situation. It is very important to do so in a very honest way, because once it is perceived to be ingenuine, then you've lost everything. Yeah. But these honest conversations are important to have. It's important to have the conversations which I find surprise people outside the Jewish community and even inside the Jewish community when I explain, for example, that there's this whole notion of you're either pro-Israeli or you're pro-Palestinian. You can be both, and in a way you must be both if you really want to see the two meet. It is not about not being able to be both pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli. It's about how not to be anti the other. And that is what is important. Yes, by all means, be anti-terror, be anti-extremism. But I think both sides have to be pro the other side, because that's the only way we will ever be able to meet. And often when I explain that the interest of the Palestinians is an Israeli interest, it's an Israeli interest to see the Palestinians thrive. That takes people by surprise. Right. And I think that it's part of having that broader conversation that is beyond, this image or tweet or whatever it is on social media.
I'm going to try to phrase this question carefully, because it could be interpreted as one of two ways, and I don't want it to go the other way. Obviously, beyond being a diplomat or representative of a government, you're a human being, and you have your own political views, and I'm sure every single Israeli diplomat or any diplomat in the world has their political views. How much harder does it make your job if and when you significantly disagree with the government policy that you're constantly, let's just assume, I don't know what your politics are and it doesn't matter for the sake of this conversation, but let's just assume, and I know the Israeli Foreign Ministry has long had a reputation of people being generally more to the left of the political spectrum than to the right, although I don't know if that's true anymore. But considering Israel's governments have been more to the right in recent years and in the past few decades, how much harder does that make your job to defend policies you might disagree with? And more importantly, on the issue that's always being brought up, and that's, of course, the Palestinian issue that we just talked about, we don't really have a coherent policy here. So, whether you agree with this policy or that policy, how do you defend a policy that there isn't a well-defined policy to defend? People can make very valid criticisms or accusations, and you don't have, you could say, well, this politician wants this and that politician wants that, and this has been kind of the de facto policy, but there's no set policy that you can really say, this is the policy I now have to defend as an Israeli diplomat? How do you work in such a, we'll call it, how would you say that in the field of diplomatic uncertainty? How do you work in such a field?
Well, you ask a broader question and then a more specific question. Yeah. With regards to the broader question, it's something that often is asked, probably of diplomats in general.
Sure.
The Israeli Foreign Service is not a political one.
Right.
We are professional diplomats. And as such, obviously, we represent not only the government of the day, but also, the country and the people in general. I have to say very honestly, I've been with the Israeli Foreign Service for about 17 years now. I have never found it a challenge, no matter who was in government, because that is what Israel is about. It's a democracy. And like any democracy, sometimes these are in power, sometimes these are in power. And when it comes to Israel's core strategic interests, I think that people often don't realize that there is actually very little difference between the different political parties. Yes, there are obviously differences, but addressing the issue of the Iranian threat, addressing right. Israel's security threats and interests, there is actually very little difference when it comes to right wing or to left wing. There are nuances, of course, and there are many differences when it comes to internal Israeli matters.
Sure.
With regards to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, yes, there have been differences in messaging over the years, depending on what the government was and what the specific policy was. But there is always a common thread, right? When I refer to our Declaration of Independence of 1948 and Israel's very clear statement that our hand is extended in peace to all our neighbors, that remains true today, no matter who is in government. What that solution will look like and when that will be feasible with regards to the Palestinians, yes, there's a broader conversation to be had. It's not it's not one that is irrelevant for this or that government. There's a complicated political situation. There have been different solutions, proposed solutions on the table over the years.
But you have a government right now, or you have a prime minister, not a government, a prime minister whose views on this differ significantly from even his own alternate prime minister, right? And again, I know you can't say probably what you really think on this, and that's
right.
Fine.
But whether it's the prime minister or the foreign minister or the previous prime minister,
yeah,
these are not elected officials that do not want to see a resolution to the conflict. What that resolution looks like, yes, it differs according to who you ask and according also to what is the current situation in the Palestinian world as well. But it is not that any Israeli figure, well, the large majority of Israeli political figures and otherwise, the broader society, it is not that people do not want to see a resolution to this conflict.
For sure. It just there's a difference when you say two-state solution versus not two-state solution. That's a huge policy discrepancy that I think would be unacceptable to many parts of the world, and so that's got to make your job a lot harder. Beyond saying something like, well, yes, we all want to see the conflict resolved, but you have again, the current prime minister has long said he doesn't want to see a two-state solution. He's against it. He's against the concept of an independent Palestinian state, which is at least where the majority of the international opinion is. And so that's, I'm just thinking that that's got to make the lives of people in your position very difficult when you don't know exactly what policy it is that you're supposed to be representing or defending. And, when some of the accusations coming against Israel kind of work on that line of, well, you're not actively seeking to end the conflict because you're not putting out realistic situations there. And I didn't want to take this conversation into, I didn't want to go in the direction of this policy or that policy, because that, it's kind of more of a theoretical discussion of how you do your job in such a situation. It just seems to me very difficult to do beyond the answer that you gave. And again, I understand if you don't want to, if you don't want to say anything beyond that. I'm just not sure what you do with that, or, with the kind of the discussion, for example, that I had with the, the Jewish professional that said she's about ready to give up on Israel. Something that I've actually had a lot with, and I've kind of been ongoing a process in recent years where, I've had to say to myself, me at least, and maybe people of our generation kind of grew up with this certain paradigm of, what the end of the conflict would look like. And it hasn't worked. And you can, it doesn't matter who you're blaming for why it hasn't worked, but it hasn't worked. And you have a significant portion of the country, probably the majority of this country, saying that's never going to work. We need to look at new models. And part of me, and kind of part of the process of what we've done in this show also, is to say, you know what, maybe I need to be a lot more humble and say, we totally need to scrap everything we've tried until now and look at something new. And I don't know what that would look like. And I kind of said that to her, honestly. I don't know what that would look like.
I think it's you say that many people now can't see it. Possibly it's true for any conflict prior to the resolution of that conflict. If you had polled the Israeli people and the Egyptian people in 1977, prior to a then Egyptian President Anwar Sadat visiting Israel and speaking at the Knesset, and asked them what the probability is in their eyes of a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, I'm pretty sure that the answer would be very different than after his visit to Israel. Yes, when reality changes, perceptions change as well. And so I don't know that it's really fair to say, well, the majority of the people don't see. Yes, the majority of the people, what they're seeing now is that they're being attacked and they're being threatened. And so I think it's natural maybe to not feel secure in saying, oh yes, we can reach an agreement with these people. But for that to be off the table, I think, history, and even the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel's short history has proven that even when it seems to be an impossibility, it can become a reality. And I think that is true with regards to the Palestinians as well. What that resolution will look like exactly, I don't know. That's exactly the issue of their having to be direct negotiations between the two sides. We all know that there have been different formulas on the table. And yes, it will take leadership on both sides to reach an agreement. But I hear Israelis as well as others saying, "Oh, we don't see any prospect for peace." I don't ascribe to that perspective personally. I think it's difficult sometimes to see from the very specific situation that you're in, but we do know that both left-wing governments in Israel and right-wing governments in Israel have made attempts at resolving this conflict, and I believe, being a mutual interest, we will at some point see a resolution, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Do you think, last question on this issue, and then Benny wanted to move back to the United States. You know, you facilitated our delegation coming over from Shiraka, where part of what we're trying to do is kind of take advantage of this social media age. You know, Benny, you talked about democratization of information. It's a term that I use a lot. It's a term that we use a lot on this show. And it's a double-edged sword. You know, it's got a lot of advantages also. And part of what we're trying to do, and I think part of what is possible today, is we can bypass state-controlled media, we can bypass governments, and we can talk directly to people. And, you know, I'm trying to spread this idea of normalization of friendly ties between Israel and the countries of the region. You know, I'm hoping that, you know, and I think it's actually contrary to what you said, Benny, where it's like trying to empty the ocean with a coffee cup. I'm actually a lot more optimistic of what it is possible to achieve via social media today, where it's actually possible to even create the impression, to create actual momentum and the impression of momentum, which are two different things, of an online movement, of societal shifts. And this is a place where perception becomes reality. And, you know, the Abraham Accords came about. I don't know who, you know, I'd be glad to hear your take on this also. How much were you expecting it to come about? How much were you expecting it to move as fast as it did? And do you see the possibility of actually changing perceptions and using social media and being able to connect to younger people? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on those two connected issues?
I think that, well, this has been, and the representatives from Shiraka addressed this as well. The Abraham Accords have been building up for some time now. And yet, I think that I was very pleasantly surprised to see the rate at which the relations are actually proceeding, which is, of course, as we know, very different from our previous experiences, because it's a different context, it's a different time, and it's now at the point where it's more and more of an accumulation, right? It's not just one country establishing relations with the state of Israel from the Arab world. It's now more and more that are joining, and I think that will have a growing effect. We are seeing it already having a growing effect, and I think that is true for on the ground. It's most certainly true for media and social media as well. And we are seeing actually, and my colleagues from the ministry who deal with this will be able to better address this, but we are seeing a lot of interest in the Arab world in our social media channels.
It's true.
Even from countries with whom we do not have relations.
Yeah.
Our Persian language social media coming from Israel.
Mostly people in LA that are just reading that. Don't get excited.
We are receiving a lot of visibility in the social media from the Arab world, and that is as a government. I think that organizations like Shiraka are doing the incredibly important work of really connecting on the ground the non-officials, And
Appreciate that plug for sure.
no, it's
It's
really
your show, man. You can plug us yourself anytime you want.
I think that it is of incredible value.
I felt very energized during that delegation, and the reception we received, and the jaws that dropped when, you know, kind of hearing this narrative. It was really cool. It was really cool to bring that, and we hope we can keep doing that.
And I think you know, an example I referred earlier to the need to break away from our natural networks and, you know, our natural audiences. And I think that such delegations are an excellent opportunity because well, not only of course did we have the encounters that we had here in Atlanta with different audiences, including with leadership from the African American community, but following that, because we had one of the participants in the African American leadership event hear Sharaka speak, that is how Omar from the delegation was then invited to speak at a different conference for African American leadership. And I think that is exactly how we break away into new circles.
Absolutely.
Shout out to Omar al-Busaidi.
That's right. I think he was listening, at least to parts of
he was
this.
too. I want to just bring it back real quickly, and I think going back, you know, stateside issues in the States. I don't think people realize this. Your region is pretty big. I mean, it's kind of massive. I think you got Georgia. Let me see if I get this right. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Mississippi.
That's exactly right. You passed the test.
That's like a quarter
Can you join your team?
Yeah, that's like a quarter of, right. Looking for a job. That's like a quarter of the U.S. landmass, basically, in terms of the geography of the United States. It is a massive. It's almost the entire South, if you take away, you know, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana. You know,
Oklahoma's not the South.
Well, you could ask people in Oklahoma; they might disagree with you on that. But it's a diverse region. I mean, it's diverse in people, it's diverse in interests, it's diverse. You know, the South is not just like this monolithic, the South. It's very different wherever you go. And of course, you know, you guys have realized that also in having a different consulate in Florida, because Florida is a whole other animal, literally and figuratively. It seems like there's just so much in terms of where Israel can relate to in such a you know, unique and diverse region such as the South. Do you, in your job, get to leave Atlanta and travel around to the other states in the region?
Absolutely. So COVID, of course, has as the challenges that has provided in every aspect of life, professionally as well. So that has had a significant impact also on the ability to travel. But yes, absolutely. I think it's a key component of not only of what we do. I think in general, working just in the Zoom environment, that really does in many ways contradict what diplomacy is about, because diplomacy is about making those personal relations. It's the personal interactions. It is the face-to-face. You know, in a Zoom environment, you get on a call, and if someone is late by 2 minutes, they're already apologizing for being late. And after maybe 1 minute of niceties, and I'm saying maybe because it can be like 20 seconds of niceties, you get to it. You get to the point, right?
Right. And that's not counting all the time that you spend telling, you know, Nancy over here in the corner that she's muted. And like, you know, this one's camera's not on.
So advantages to using this medium as well, right? We can have events where we include students from throughout the region. We can have speakers without having the necessity to bring them in. They can be speaking from Israel, from anywhere else. There are advantages, and I'm sure that many of those we will retain even post-COVID, wherever that is in the future. But the ability to really connect on a personal level with people, I think, is also about being there in person, and it is something that we aim to do as much as possible.
What?
Wait,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was
going to ask if you have a favorite state be non-diplomatic for a moment and tell me if you have a personal.
They are all favorites. No, seriously, I will say that the United States, of course, is not one unit in its characteristics. And I think that here in the Southeast, we are incredibly fortunate to have overall very, very strong support for Israel, an understanding of the importance of the relations, of the mutual benefit of the relations. And I think in that we are incredibly fortunate. But there are also, of course, unique challenges that that need addressing in this region.
Omar is listening, by the way, and he sends a shout out to both of you. Omar has become my Emirati brother from another mother, for sure.
I think an incredible asset, really, in conveying what peace is about, what peace can look like, and what it means.
I agree. I have a 3-pack of your experience in the American Southeast. What meeting, message, question, whatever it is you want to take, what has one experience that shocked you the most, surprised you the most? What has been your biggest singular challenge so far in this position? And I mean a specific challenge, maybe something that really threw you for a loop, a meeting, again, a question, a protest. I don't know whatever it is. And what would you say is the biggest highlight so far of your experience as Consul General? Take your time. I always love these open-ended questions.
I think that one of the advantages in diplomacy and in this career is that you are in a constant state of learning, because you arrive to a new position, to a new location, and you need to be very, very open in learning. And I feel like over the past 2 years here, which is not a long time, I've learned a lot. And I think that while I identified early on the importance of working with the African American community, there are many things that took me by surprise, including really the from our perspective, how little many know about what Israel is about, and how it is viewed, but also what we don't know, right? I arrived here and someone mentioned Juneteenth, and I had no idea what that is. And it was, it's a celebration of a pretty significant issue, and yet I was not familiar with it, being an Israeli. And I think that that's it's an eye opener and an example of how much we all still have to learn. And I think that ties also into the most significant challenge. I think that the most significant challenge, as I view it, is not about dealing with the anti. It's about dealing with the ignorance, with those who just don't know. And I think that is a significant challenge that will remain in the foreseeable future, the most significant challenge for us, for Israel in general. What else was in your questions?
And what was the biggest highlight so far? Singular highlight, maybe an experience, a meeting that you've had of this specific job.
It was discovering Waffle House.
No.
Chicken.
Um,
It,
well,
it might not be related to your work. It just might be related to living in Atlanta. I don't know.
no, I think really many highlights. I think that that's part of having the joy in this career and in this way of life, is that you're enthusiastic and you enjoy the things that you do and the outcomes that you see. And so I can think of really many such positive. But I mentioned Juneteenth, for example. So one of the recent highlights for me is that following the fact that not only was I not aware of the existence of Juneteenth and what it means, I also saw, observed around me, a reluctance by many to recognize Juneteenth, to celebrate Juneteenth, right? It's only become an official federal holiday just now. And so we initiated a Juneteenth celebration event in cooperation with the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. And I approached my fellow consuls general again, because I see power in messaging that is coming on behalf of the international community. And I offered for them to join us in a Juneteenth and hosting a Juneteenth celebration. And I'm glad that 9 of them did. So we were 10 consulates in Atlanta, representatives of the international community, celebrating with the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus and African American leadership, celebrating Juneteenth. And it was such a unique and unexpected event, right? Because it's not about the African American community celebrating Juneteenth on its own, that it was received with a lot of appreciation and actually requests for it to become an annual event. And so, and it's not directly Israel related, right? But it's an opportunity for Israel to initiate and be part of something bigger and an important message, I think. So one example.
And I think it's great that, you may have mentioned this to me when we were walking around Atlanta, that it's not about always promoting Israel, but you have to get involved in celebrating or remembering or commemorating, or that's how you build alliances, that's how you build relationships. And I think it's fantastic how you did that. All right, let's if we wrap up with 2 questions. One, do you already know what your next posting is going to be, or if you don't, what would you want it to be?
I do not know. And I think that it's part of what I love about this career, that I don't know.
You like the uncertainty?
I find it personally depressing if I were to be in a situation where I could tell you where I'm going to be and what I'm going to be doing 5 or 10 years from now. To me, that's depressing. I love the fact that I don't know where I'm going to be and what I'm going to be doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I think that's...
Benny's having
no, without mentioning names, are there countries for you where it's like, if there's a red line, which is like, if they tell me that I'm going here, no.
What would be your dream job?
Well, I wouldn't really be told where I'm going, again, because we choose to apply, and then we either get or don't get what we're applying for.
Would you like not apply for countries that are like very cold most of the year, or very hot, or it's like, are there certain just general preferences of where you want to live and what climate or what,
I really try to stay away, try to stay away from what I won't do, because you discover points of interest, a joy, importance in a variety. And I think that's so far, I mean, what I've done, has been a variety as well. And I've enjoyed all postings and everything that I've done. I think it's part of the fun. And we'll see what the next challenges will be. But yeah, again, it's really what what I enjoy about this career. There's always a next challenge, and always something further to learn and get acquainted with.
Great. Awesome.
Last question. This coming year, the second year of the Abraham Accords, if you had to pick the next country that could normalize with Israel, what would you put your money on?
Well, this is where I'm going to end up answering diplomatically. Because I can't really look. I know that there is so much potential out there, and I know that there is no secret that we have existing relations with different countries in our region and beyond our region that are not yet at the stage of really establishing them openly, publicly as official diplomatic relations. But we do enjoy that, and I do think that we will see this continue to grow, because in the end, it is of mutual interest. The relations that we are now formalizing are based really on addressing common challenges and on promoting a mutual interest for the benefit of both sides. And I think that the more that this camp grows, the easier it will be to have others join. So yeah, not naming a specific country, but very, very optimistic about the growth of this camp.
It will probably not be Afghanistan.
Sadly, no. Although who knows? You never know how.
They say they've changed.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that as a woman, I'm watching with great concern what is going on there.
Most definitely.
And I wish the Afghan people and all those may suffer even more, a brighter future ahead.
Can I ask one final question, as long as we're on that topic? What is Israel's diplomatic role when there's a crisis like that, which is a very human crisis?
You mean with a country with whom we don't have?
In a country of which we don't have. Like there was something today I saw a news flash about, somebody in Israel mentioned that, maybe it was in Meretz, that we should take a role in resettling Afghan refugees here in Israel, for example, which anybody who's living in Israel right now, I think, and I don't see that as something that will realistically happen, but I think that it's nice to say that.
I think that we have a proven record of being true to the value of Tikkun Olam, and of going out of our way wherever it is feasible to assist. And it's not just you're speaking of a country that is a bit further away from us, but I think Operation Good Neighbor on our northern border, where Israel treated injured Syrians without asking questions, because they were humans in need of assistance. I think that is a perfect example of what the state of Israel is about, and what many are not familiar with.
Definitely. Well, Anat, thank you so much for being here with us today. I definitely can say on behalf of Dan, who's slowly fading into a jet lag coma.
I have a secret to get over jet lag in one day wherever I go. But yes, I'm definitely feeling the effects of three days of travel, 4 flights. How many flights did I go on?
Be strong.
Oh, it was ridiculous. Anyway, Anat, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both.
It was great seeing you.
And we wish you all the best, and all the best of luck in everything you're doing out there in the Southeast on our behalf. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Take care.
We'll see you all next time on Nuance.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.